The pit boss's hand closed on Loretta Sandiford's elbow, and the young officer drew her thin wrists behind her back, and the worn leather badge holder went out of her fingers and slid across the red carpet face down, under the base of a slot machine. She was 54, 5'2", in a black cardigan and low heels worn down at the back, and she did not pull away. Around her the floor glowed the way it does at 3 a.m, blue neon, gold table lamps, dark camera domes overhead. By the pit rail, Vince Corliss, the man who had called the police, folded his arms and smiled with one side of his mouth. He had taken one look at a small, elderly black woman writing on a scrap of paper near his cage, decided she was a stray off a bus tour, and refused to look at one piece of paper. What he did not know was that 20 feet behind him, framed on the lobby wall he passed twice a day, hung the state gaming license of this entire property with her name on it and her photograph. Before we find out who the woman in the handcuffs really was, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's dive back into the story. Loretta Sandiford had carried a cocktail tray in that building before she owned it. And if you want to understand her at all, you only need to know what happened to her wrist. She was 19. It was her 4th shift. She was working the outer bank of slot machines with a tray of 11 drinks, and a man at the end of the row put his foot out, not hard, not even meanly, the way a bored man does something to see what happens. And she went down on one knee, and the tray came back across her forearm, and a highball glass of hot coffee went with it. The burn ran 4 inches up the inside of her left wrist. She still has the scar. It is thin and pale now, and she is not remotely self-conscious about it. And she will show it to you if the conversation goes that way, which it does more often than you would expect, because she uses it to make a point. The point is not the man. The man was nothing. The point is what happened 40 minutes later when she came out of the back with her arm wrapped and the shift manager told her she could go home for the night. And then, in the kind-hearted voice of a man doing her a favor, told her she was going to be moved to the outer bank permanently. Not the main floor, not the pit. He said the main floor girls had a certain look, and he said it while looking at her. And he had the decency to be a little embarrassed about it, which she found, at 19, more insulting than if he had just been vile. So, Loretta Sandiford did a thing that changed her entire life, and she did it out of pure spite. She asked for a transfer to surveillance. Nobody wanted surveillance. Surveillance was a windowless room upstairs, with bad chairs and a wall of monitors and no tips. It was where they put people they did not know what to do with. She went up there at 20, and she stayed 9 years. And in those 9 years, sitting in the dark, looking down through 200 cameras at a room full of people who did not know she existed, Loretta Sandiford learned the single skill that every other thing in her life would be built on. She learned to see, not to watch. Anybody can watch. She learned that a man who is stealing has a different rhythm than a man who is losing, that a dealer who is in trouble touches her own face, that the 3 seconds before something happens look completely different from the 3 seconds after, and that the whole art of it is refusing to decide what you are looking at until the thing has finished telling you. She caught a chip cup scam in her 2nd year that had been running for 11 months. She caught a cage cashier in her 4th. In her 6th, she called a man out of a crowd of 400 at a New Year's party because of the way he was holding his jacket. And she was right. And that story got told about her for 20 years. At 29, she came down out of the dark and went into compliance, which is the least glamorous department in any casino and the only one that can close the building. She spent 11 years there. She learned the regulations the way other people learn songs. She wrote the property's anti-money laundering program twice, and the second version got copied by 2 other houses in the state. And at 41, when the family that owned the place fell apart in the way families do, Loretta Sandiford went to 3 banks and a very patient investor and bought 19% of the resort she had once been told she did not have the right face to work the floor of. 9 years later, she owned all of it. There are 2 things she kept from all of that, and both of them matter to this story. The first is her key employee license, which the state issues to the people who actually run a gaming property, and which by law has to be displayed. Hers hangs in a plain black frame in the lobby corridor between the elevators and the coffee stand, with her legal name and her photograph on it, and a couple of thousand people walk past it every day, and none of them look because it is a piece of paper on a wall. The second is a habit. 2 or 3 nights a week, Retta comes down onto her own floor between 2 and 4 in the morning, in whatever she was wearing at home, with a canvas tote and no entourage, and walks it. The graveyard shift knows her by sight, most of them. The day people mostly do not. She has never corrected anybody who did not recognize her, and she has told her executives in a meeting exactly why. A room shows you what it really is at 3 in the morning, she said, and it only tells the truth to people it isn't afraid of. She came down at 20 to 3 on a Tuesday in a navy knit dress and a black cardigan, with her reading glasses pushed up into her short gray hair, and her hearing aid turned down 2 clicks, because the slot floor at that hour is a wall of noise made for nobody. She walked it the way she had learned to walk it upstairs, which is not the way anybody else walks a casino. Other people look at the games. Retta looked at the seams. She came up the main aisle with her tote over her shoulder, and inside of 4 minutes she had collected 6 small things. A table limit sign at the 3rd blackjack game was still set at 25 when the game had been raised to 50 at midnight, which meant a player could sit down, be told a different number than the sign said, and be right to be angry about it. A dollar slot at the end of Bank 9 had a belly glass seal that had been broken and retaped instead of resealed, and retaped is not sealed, and a machine that is not sealed is not a machine. It is a lawsuit. A fire door in the north corridor was propped 4 inches with a folded cardboard coaster. The carpet at the entrance to the high-limit room had a lifted seam you could catch a heel on. The bar had a well bottle with a pour spout that did not match the others. And the ashtray urn by the elevators was full, which is nothing, except that it is somebody's job at 2-hour intervals, and it had not been done since midnight. None of it was a crime. All of it was the quiet, ordinary evidence of a building being run by people who were tired and by a person who was measuring the wrong things. She filed it away without writing any of it down, because she had a memory that had been trained in a dark room for 9 years, and she moved on toward the pit. At the near end of the 3rd baccarat table, a young dealer was on the box, tapping out and washing cards for a game with 1 player at it. His name tag said K. Boateng. He was maybe 24, very neat, with the particular economical hands that dealers get in the first year if they are going to be good. And he glanced at her and smiled and said, "Good morning," like he meant it, and then went back to the cards. "Slow tonight," Retta said. "It's Tuesday." He said it pleasantly and then, in a slightly different voice, quicker and lower, without looking up from the shoe, "Ma'am, if you're going to play, play at the far end, away from this side." Retta looked at him. "Better view," he said, and smiled, and the smile was completely wrong for the sentence, and a woman came down the aisle with a tray, and the moment closed. She would think about those 11 words for a long time afterward, not because they were dramatic, but because they were what was left of a young man's courage after somebody had spent 3 weeks sanding it down. He could not say what he knew, so he said the smallest true thing he could get away with, to a stranger, in case it helped. She sat down on a stool at an empty 3-card game 2 tables over, which is the best seat in any casino if you actually want to see, because nobody looks at a woman who is not playing. She put her tote on her lap. She turned her hearing aid up 1 click, and she started watching the man at Kwame Boateng's table. He was about 50, white, in an expensive golf shirt and no jacket, with a heavy watch and the kind of tan that comes from being outdoors on purpose. He was playing baccarat at 2,000 a hand, which at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday is not remarkable at that property, and he was losing without any expression at all, which is. At 2:51, he ran out of chips, and a floor supervisor walked him to the cage, and Retta watched him buy in for $9,200 in cash out of a leather folder. She noted the time out of 30 years of habit and thought nothing of it. At 3:16, he moved to the 2nd baccarat table, which is 11 feet away, and is a different game for reporting purposes only in the sense that it is not, and he bought in again. She could not see the amount from where she was, so she got off the stool and drifted down the aisle behind a bank of video poker with her tote on her shoulder, like a woman looking for a bathroom, and she read the cage window over a stranger's shoulder, the way she had read 1,000 things over strangers' shoulders in 9 years upstairs. 8,800. A different cashier. Loretta Sandiford felt something go cold and flat in her chest, the way it does when a thing you have been looking at for 10 minutes suddenly resolves. At 4:01, he did it again. 9,400. A third cashier at the far window, and this time the floor supervisor who walked him over, was not the same one. And Retta watched the man hand over a folder of banded cash, and watched the cashier count it, and watched her not fill anything out. $27,400 in 70 minutes. In 3 transactions, from one man, none of them over $10,000. If you have never worked in that industry, let me tell you what that means, because it is not a technicality, and it is the whole spine of this story. Any cash transaction over $10,000 in a single gaming day has to be reported to the federal government. That is not a casino rule. That is federal law, and it is not optional, and it has been that way since before Loretta Sandiford carried a tray. And because the people who wrote the law were not fools, they also made it a separate crime to break your cash up into smaller pieces on purpose to stay underneath that number. It has a name. It is called structuring, and it is the single oldest, dumbest, most reliable red flag in the entire business. And every cage cashier in America is trained on it in their first week. And there is a second document, less famous and far more important, called the multiple transaction log. The cage is required to keep a running record of every cash transaction by the same person during the gaming day, precisely so that 3 separate cashiers cannot be used the way 3 separate cashiers had just been used, because it is the log, and only the log, that adds them up. Retta walked past the far cage window slowly and looked through the glass at the clipboard hanging on the inside of the counter, which she had specified in a memo 11 years earlier and had personally ensured was hung in a place where a supervisor could see it without asking. There were 4 entries on it for the entire shift. None of them was for a man in a green golf shirt. She stood there in the noise with her tote on her shoulder and did the arithmetic that only somebody who has written a compliance program can do at 4 in the morning. $27,400 was not the problem. $27,400 was Tuesday. The problem was that this had gone through 3 cashiers without a single one of them stopping it, which meant it was not a mistake by one person. And the problem was the empty log, which meant somebody had decided not to add. And the last thing, the thing that made her put her hand flat on the cool marble ledge of the cage surround for a second, was this. If a property lets that pattern run and does not file, the property does not get a scolding. The property's license goes in front of the commission. And the license was not a piece of paper on a wall to her. It was 2,400 people with health insurance. Retta took the folded receipt for a bottle of water out of her cardigan pocket and a pen and started writing times and amounts on the back of it. That was the moment Vince Corliss came out of the pit. What Corliss saw was this: a small, elderly black woman in a cheap cardigan and worn-down shoes, standing 3 feet from the cage windows at 4 in the morning, writing something on a scrap of paper, having just spent 40 minutes walking the floor without playing a single hand. Now, I want to be accurate about Vince Corliss, because the accurate version is worse than the cartoon. He was 44. He was vice president of casino operations. He had come from a property 2 states over 16 months earlier with a reputation for what the industry calls player development, which means the ability to find men with a great deal of money and make them feel like they are the only person in the building. He was extremely good at it. He had never in his life used a slur, would have been genuinely and loudly offended to be accused of anything, and had a photograph in his office of himself with a black championship boxer. What Corliss had was a sorting system. The Cardinal had 2 kinds of guests in his head. There were the guests who mattered, and there were the people who came in on the $4 shuttle from the senior center with a cup of nickels and used the bathroom. He never said the second half out loud, but he had reorganized the entire floor around it, and every host and pit boss under him had learned the shape of it inside a month. And a small old black woman in a sagging cardigan, standing near his cage with a pen, was not, in Vince Corliss's head, a person with a reason. She was a category with a problem attached. "Ma'am," he came around the rail fast. "Ma'am, what are you doing?" Retta finished the number she was writing and looked up over the top of her glasses. "Good morning." "What are you writing?" "Times and amounts." She said it plainly because it was true. "Can I ask you 3 questions?" "You can tell me what you're writing down about my cage." "1." She held up a small finger. "The gentleman in the green shirt has bought in 3 times in the last 70 minutes at 9,200, 8,800, and 9,400 at 3 different windows. Has anyone aggregated those?" Something moved across Vince Corliss's face. It was fast, and it was not confusion. 2. Your multiple transaction log has 4 entries on it for the whole shift, and none of them is his. Who is maintaining it tonight? "Ma'am." 3. She lowered her hand. His marker paperwork at the second table was signed before the counter check was written, which I could see from 11 feet away, and that is backwards. So, my 3rd question is, can we pull the log and the tape for the last 90 minutes and get whoever is on call for compliance on the phone? That's all I'm asking for. 90 minutes of tape and 1 phone call. Nobody said anything for a second, and I want you to sit inside that second with me, because everything that came after it was avoidable. Corliss could have said, "Who are you?" 3 words in a curious voice instead of an angry one. He could have said, "Show me." He could have picked up the house phone 11 inches from his left hand. The player would have been embarrassed. The night would have been long, and Vince Corliss would still have a career in this business. But Corliss had made the decision that mattered 11 weeks earlier, in a suite upstairs, with a man in a green golf shirt and a bottle of something old, and every choice after that was just the bill arriving. Curtis Vane was worth a number Corliss had put in a slide deck. Curtis Vane's play was the reason the 4th quarter hold looked the way it looked, and the reason Corliss's own bonus looked the way it looked, and Corliss had been told once by a host in a careful voice that Mr. Vane preferred to buy in pieces, and Corliss had said in a completely neutral tone, then let him buy in pieces. And now a woman off a bus tour was standing in his cage corridor at 4 in the morning, saying out loud, in front of 2 cashiers, the exact 3 sentences Corliss had spent 11 weeks making sure nobody said out loud. So he did what frightened men do. He stopped talking about the log and started talking about the woman. "Okay, no, ma'am, I don't know who you are, I don't know what this is, and you were standing at my cage windows at 4 in the morning, writing down transaction amounts and cashier positions." His voice came up and got a shine on it, the performing voice, aimed past her at anyone in earshot. "Do you understand how that looks? Do you have any idea how that looks?" "I do, actually," Retta said. "It looks like somebody doing exactly what your own program requires somebody to do. But I'll make it easy. My identification is in my bag. There's a state license in there with my photograph on it. Let me show you that, and then you can decide whether to listen to me about the log." She began to lift the canvas tote. "Don't!" He turned his head without turning his body. "Marty. Marty." The pit boss came at a fast walk, a heavy, tired man in his late 50s with a lanyard and 22 years, and Corliss said, "This lady is leaving," and Marty Grissom said, "Ma'am, if you'll come with me," and put out a hand. And Loretta Sandiford said, quite pleasantly, "No, thank you." That was all. She did not raise her voice or step back or make any move at all. She simply declined to be walked out of a building she had bought before somebody looked at a clipboard. And that mild refusal is the hinge the entire night turns on, because it moved her, in Corliss's head, from a nuisance into a threat. And men like Corliss have a phone number for threats. Quick thing before we keep going. If you have ever been the person who was right and got told to leave anyway, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe, because the next few minutes of this are hard, and I want you here for what comes after them. Corliss stepped 4 paces down the corridor and dialed. "Yeah, this is Vince Corliss, VP of Operations at the Cardinal. I need an officer on the main floor by the cage. We've got a female who's been on the floor about 40 minutes not playing. She's been writing down cash amounts and cashier window positions, and she was standing right up against the glass. Older black female, gray hair, glasses, dark cardigan. No, she's not a guest. She's not playing anything. Yeah, given what she's writing down, that's exactly my concern. Thank you." He hung up and looked at Retta with the settled face of a man who has successfully handed a question to somebody else. And Loretta Sandiford, who had been burned by a coffee glass in that building at 19 and had bought it at 50, stood under her own 200 cameras and understood that her floor was going to fail the test and that she was going to let it all the way down. Because Retta was not the first person on that floor to say those sentences. She was just the first one Corliss could not move to graveyard. Kwame Boateng was 24, and he had been dealing for 11 months. He had come to the country at 9, and his mother cleaned rooms at a hotel 4 miles up the road for 19 years. And he had a dealing school certificate and an associate's degree in accounting, and a plan that he had written out on paper, which he did not tell people about because people laugh. The plan had 4 steps. Deal for 2 years, get into the cage, get into compliance, sit for the certified anti-money laundering exam by 30. He was good at the table. Dealers are not furniture. A good dealer is the closest thing a casino has to a nervous system on the floor, because they stand in one place for 8 hours and they see the same hands over and over, and they know things about a game that no executive with a report will ever know. 23 days before all of this, Kwame had been on the box at the second baccarat table when Curtis Vane bought in for the 3rd time in one night. He did what he had been trained to do in week 1 of dealing school and week 1 of the property's own compliance class. He told his floor supervisor. The floor supervisor said, "He's a host guest, don't worry about it." So at the end of shift, Kwame filled out a suspicious activity notification on the property's own internal form in careful handwriting. Date, table, guest description, 3 buy-in times, 3 amounts. And he signed it. Nothing happened. 6 days later, it happened again in front of him. And he wrote a second one, and this time he did not put it in the box. He walked it up to the executive offices on his break and asked for the VP. Vince Corliss read it in about 4 seconds. Then he laid it face down on the desk, put his hand flat on top of it, and smiled at him. "Kwame, sit down a second. Let me help you with your career." Kwame sat down. "Do you know what a host guest is?" He did not wait. "A host guest is somebody whose play pays for the lights in this building, and about 1/3 of the payroll, including yours. Mr. Vane has been coming here for 2 years. He's been vetted. He's been through everything you can imagine, at a level you don't have access to, by people whose entire job is exactly that." He tapped the paper twice under his hand. "Now, here's the part I need you to hear, because you're sharp, and I don't want this to hurt you. This is the second piece of paper in 6 days with your name on it that says, in effect, that our cage, our floor supervisors, and my office are all missing federal reporting on a 2-year guest. That's not a report anymore. That's an allegation. It lives forever, it has your name on it, and it goes with you to every property in this state." He let that sit for a moment. "Nobody's threatening anybody," he said warmly. "I'm telling you how a file reads." Kwame said quietly that he had watched the man buy in 3 times under 10,000 in one shift, twice now. "You watched a man buy chips," Corliss said. "Let the people who are licensed to make those calls make those calls." And he swept the form into a drawer and stood up, which meant Kwame stood up and held the door. 11 days after that, the schedule came out, and Kwame Boateng was on graveyard permanently. When he asked, his shift manager looked genuinely uncomfortable and said it had come down from above and that it was about attitude, and could not, when pressed, produce a single example of an attitude. That is what Kwame would say 8 weeks later to a federal investigator with a recorder on the table, and it is the most damning sentence in the entire file. He never actually said he'd fire me. He put my name and my schedule in the same conversation and let me do the rest myself. And Dara Chen went through her own version, and it is worth 2 minutes, because Dara was not a villain either. Dara was 38, a cage supervisor, 14 years on the property, with a mortgage and a mother with dementia in a facility that cost more per month than the mortgage. She was the one who had actually raised it first, back in the spring, in an email with the word aggregate in the subject line. She had been called into a meeting about it. Nobody had told her to do anything illegal. Nobody ever does. What Corliss had said, pleasantly across a table, was that Mr. Vane found the cage process intrusive, that he had complained, and that going forward Mr. Vane's transactions were to be handled at whichever window was open with minimum friction, and that if there were any questions about aggregation, they should come to him personally rather than into the log, because he did not want the log cluttered with items that were going to be resolved anyway. That sentence is a masterpiece. Read it again. There is nothing in it you could put in front of a jury, and it accomplished exactly what it was designed to accomplish, which is that, for 16 months, the multiple transaction log of a licensed casino had a hole in it in the shape of one man. Dara did it. She hated it. She kept her own private notes at home in a spiral notebook, because some part of her knew, and that notebook is the reason a federal case exists. That is what an institutional failure actually looks like. It is never one monster. It is 4 or 5 ordinary people, each with exactly one thing to lose, arranged by a single person who knows precisely what each of those things is. So, when Vince Corliss hung up the phone at the cage corridor that Tuesday morning, Kwame Boateng was standing at his table 9 feet away with a shoe of cards in front of him and no players, watching a stranger get punished for saying out loud the sentences he had been punished for twice in writing. "Mr. Corliss." His voice came out thin, and he pushed it through anyway. "Sir, she's right. I filed it. I filed it twice, the 11th and the 17th. 3 buy-ins both nights, the same guest." Corliss turned and looked at him, and his voice went gentle, which was worse than shouting. "Kwame, take your break. Now please. Sir, the log is your break." And Kwame Boateng, 24 years old, 11 months in, with a 4-step plan written on a piece of paper in a drawer at home, and a mother who told everyone at church that her son worked at the Cardinal, tapped out of his game, and turned to go, because that is what almost all of us do, and anybody who tells you different has never had a manager's hand flat on top of their name. He got as far as the end of the pit, then he stopped and stood there with his back to it, and did not go to the break room. Retta saw all of it, and it told her more about her own building than 4 years of quarterly reports ever had. People always stop me here, and they ask it a little angrily, which is fair. Why did she not just say it? 4 words. I own this building. Corliss goes the color of the felt. The phone call gets walked back. The log gets pulled, and everybody goes home. Why would a 54-year-old woman stand in a cage corridor and let this happen to her? Retta asked herself the same thing while she waited, and the answer had 3 parts, and she has since said all 3 of them out loud in a deposition. The first was evidence. If she said the 4 words then, the next 10 minutes would be about her. Corliss would fall over himself, and the apology would be the last honest thing said in that building for a month. And then, at some point between 4 in the morning and the start of day shift, somebody would go and add 4 entries to a clipboard. She had spent 11 years in compliance. She knew exactly how fast a log can grow backwards. There is no crime in the world easier to erase than a piece of paper that nobody filled in. And the only version of that clipboard that would ever be worth anything was the version that existed before anybody knew the owner was standing in the room. Owners get told what happened. Strangers get shown. The second was the young man at the second baccarat table. She did not yet know he had filed twice. She only knew he had told a stranger which end of a table to sit at, and had then walked 11 feet toward the break room and stopped. She knew that shape, and she knew that if this ended with a name and a title, The lesson for every dealer on that floor would be that telling the truth is safe only when the owner happens to be standing next to you when you do it. That is not a lesson. That is a lottery ticket. And the third part she has only ever said once, to her sister, in a car. She had been told in that building at 19 that she did not have the right face for the main floor. She had spent 35 years and everything she had making sure the building belonged to her. And she had never once tested whether it had actually changed, because for 13 years she had walked that floor at 3 in the morning and been quietly left alone, and she had let that stand as proof. She was 54. She was standing in the middle of the answer. She was going to hear all of it. "I'll wait right here," she told the pit boss. "I'm not going anywhere." They waited 9 minutes. Nobody spoke. A cleaner ran a vacuum 2 aisles over. And upstairs, in a windowless room with bad chairs, the director of surveillance finished reviewing a dispute from the swing shift and sent a print to the machine on the mezzanine, which meant that in about 6 minutes, he would have to walk down 1 flight of stairs to get it. And that completely unremarkable fact mattered more than anything else that happened that night. The officer arrived at 4:19. Brody Nash was 27, 3 years, and change on the job, working an approved off-duty detail at the property because the money is good and the shifts are quiet. He was not a cruel man. If you had asked him, he would have said with total sincerity that he treated everybody the same, and he would have believed it. What he had never been given in 3 years was 10 uninterrupted minutes of training on the most dangerous thing an officer does, which is arrive somewhere with no idea what happened and immediately decide, from clothing and posture and who speaks first, which of 2 people is the complainant and which is the suspect. He had about 8 seconds and 2 human beings. One of them was a tall man in a good suit with a property credential, walking toward him with his hand out and his story already loaded. The other was a very small elderly woman in a cardigan holding a canvas bag, saying nothing. Everything that came after was paperwork. Officer Vince Corliss, VP of Operations. Handshake, then the small step to the side, so that the 2 of them were looking at Retta together, which is a thing people do without knowing they do it, and which has decided more cases than evidence ever has. This woman has been on our floor about an hour, not playing. She's been standing at our cage windows writing down cash amounts and which cashier is at which window. She won't say who she's with, and she's refused 2 requests to leave. Nash looked at her. "Ma'am, is that accurate?" "Parts of it," Retta said. "I have been on this floor about an hour, and I have not played. I have written down 3 cash transaction amounts, 3 times, and 3 window numbers, because they add up to $27,400 from 1 guest in 70 minutes, and this property is legally required to add them up, and has not." She lifted the tote very slightly. "Officer, my name is Loretta Sandiford. My identification is in this bag, along with a license issued by the state of this state, with my photograph on it that will explain the entire situation to you in about 10 seconds. May I show you?" That was, in the plainest terms available, a woman offering a police officer the solution to the whole problem out loud, with her hands where he could see them. "Ma'am, do you have any weapons?" "No." "Do you work for this casino?" "No," said Retta, and it was true. And it was the answer that finished her, because behind Nash's shoulder, Vince Corliss was already shaking his head slowly with his eyebrows up, doing the small, silent pantomime of a reasonable man listening to nonsense. "She's not staff," Corliss said. "I've never seen her before in my life." That part, at least, was completely true. "Ma'am, I need you to hand me the bag." "I'm going to do better than that," Retta said. "I'm going to open it and take out a leather badge holder and hold it out to you. It's in the front pocket on the left. I'm going to use my right hand slowly, and I'd like you to watch my hands the whole time so there's no confusion, all right?" It was the most cooperative sentence anybody said on that floor all night. She narrated the movement before she made it, which is a thing black people in this country learn young and never entirely stop doing, and she made it slowly, reaching into her own bag for her own license in a building she owned outright, in front of a man who had told her twice that she had no business in it. She brought her right hand across. "Hands, ma'am, hands out of the bag." I want to be fair to Officer Nash, so here is his version. A credentialed executive had told him this woman had been recording cash positions at a casino cage. He had asked for the bag and not received it. He saw a hand go into a container. In the language he was trained in, that is a furtive movement. And furtive movement is the phrase that turns a mistake into a policy. Here's the other version. A woman had just told him, out loud, in advance, precisely what her hand was going to do and why, and Nash did not listen, for exactly the same reason Corliss did not look at the clipboard, and Dara did not put it in the log, and 3 cashiers did not add. 4 separate times, it was faster to trust a label than to check a fact. The tote came off her shoulder and went down. The worn leather badge holder came out of the front pocket with it and hit the carpet and slid under the base of a slot machine, face down, 6 feet away. "You're not under arrest, ma'am. You're being detained." "I understand," Retta said, and her voice did not change at all, and that is what everyone who was there remembers most. It did not change. The cuffs went on behind her back, and they went on tight. 1 click pass necessary, out of the small performing competence of a young officer with an audience. Her wrists are very thin. 40 minutes later, there would be 2 red bands across them that took 3 days to fade, and a photograph of those wrists would end up in an internal affairs file, and that photograph would matter a great deal. They walked her up the main aisle of her own casino. She was not dragged. Nobody hit her. It took 2 minutes. She went past Bank 9 with a retaped seal, and past the fire door propped with a coaster, and past the high-limit entrance with the lifted carpet seam, and a handful of people at the video poker bar turned on their stools to watch, and a man playing a dollar machine said something to his wife and laughed. And in the lobby corridor, between the elevators and the coffee stand, the procession passed within 4 feet of a plain black frame on the wall containing the current state gaming license of the Cardinal Resort and Casino, bearing the name Loretta Sandiford, and a photograph of a small woman in glasses. Not one person in that procession read a single word of it. Kwame Boateng had not gone to the break room. He stood at the end of the pit with his hands at his sides and his heart going like a bird in a box, and he thought about a hand flat on a piece of paper, and about a schedule, and about his mother at church, and then he took his phone out of his vest pocket, turned it sideways, and pressed record. His hand shook so badly the first 4 seconds are unusable. He got the rest. He got the cuffs, and the tote on the floor, and the corner of the badge holder under the slot base. And then he walked, filming, all the way to the lobby corridor and got the frame on the wall and the woman in handcuffs in the same shot, which is the frame that ended up on 3 networks. As they came level with him, Retta turned her head, found him, looked straight into the camera for about a second, and gave him one small nod. Kwame said later that he did not know what it meant. He only knew it meant keep going, so he kept going. Hey, real quick. If you have ever stood there with your phone out, doing the math on whether the truth is worth your job, tell me in the comments because I would genuinely like to know how that went for you. And if you want to see what happens next, hit like and subscribe because the next 4 minutes are the reason I wanted to tell you this one. Because at that exact moment, on the mezzanine stairs, a 63-year-old man was coming down one flight to pick up a printout. Ed Sikorsky had run surveillance at the Cardinal for 19 years and had worked in that room for 28. He was 63, heavy, gray, with reading glasses on a cord and a coffee cup he had been using since the second Bush administration. He had come to that property at 24 as an operator on graveyard, and he had been trained personally at a console over 11 months by a 29-year-old woman who had told him the sentence he had repeated to every trainee for the following 28 years. Don't decide what you're looking at until it's finished telling you. He came down the mezzanine stairs with his glasses on his head and got 4 steps onto the main floor before his eyes came up. The coffee cup hit the carpet. Hey! Hey! It came out of him at a volume that turned every head at the video poker bar. He was already moving. A 63-year-old man with a bad hip running across a casino floor, and he had not run anywhere in a decade. Take those off her. Take those off her right now. Sir, stay back. Do you know who that is? He came up short and pointed, and his hand was shaking, and his voice cracked right in the middle of it. That's Loretta Sandiford. That is Loretta Sandiford. She owns this. She owns the building you're standing in. Her license is on the wall behind you. It is on the wall right behind you. Look at it. Look at it. Everybody looked at the wall. It was right there. It had been right there the entire time, in a plain black frame, 4 feet from the officer's shoulder, in the corridor Vince Corliss had walked through twice a day for 16 months. The second unit had come through the porte cochere 90 seconds earlier, and Sergeant Frank Mullane had already been walking because 23 years teaches you to arrive slowly and look at the floor on the way in. He had come up the aisle the long way, past Bank 9, and he had done the one thing nobody else in that building had done all night. He had bent down and picked up the paper. He came over with a worn leather badge holder in one hand, squared and closed, and a canvas tote in the other. "Brody," he said, "come here a minute." He did not make a speech. He opened the badge holder and held it so that only Nash could see and moved his thumb down it. A driver's license. Behind it, in the second window, a state gaming license, key employee, with a photograph and a number, and an expiration date 14 months out. Behind that, a board of directors identification card with the word chairman on it. And behind that, loose and soft at the corners, a laminated employee badge from 1991 with a photograph of a 19-year-old girl on it and the word beverage printed under her name. Mullane looked at the badge holder and at the woman in handcuffs and at the frame on the wall 4 feet away with the same face in it. "Key employee license," he said quietly. "State issued. Name matches the driver's license. Name matches the board card." He tipped his head an inch toward the wall. "Name matches the license hanging in that frame, which I would guess is the license this whole building operates under." "She said she didn't work here," Nash started. "She doesn't work here," Mullane said. "She owns it. Take them off." The cuffs came off in the lobby corridor of the Cardinal in front of about 40 people. Retta brought her hands around in front of her and turned them over, and there were 2 raised red bands across her thin wrists, the skin white at the edges, running right across the old pale burn scar on the left one. Ed Sikorsky made a sound and put his hand over his mouth. "Miss Sandiford," Mullane said, "my body camera is running, and I want this in the file. I'm sorry. This was handled wrong from the first minute, and I'm going to document it that way." "Thank you, Sergeant." Retta flexed her fingers a few times to get the blood back into them. "Are you keeping that badge holder? You want it back?" "No," she said. "I want you to keep it, and I want everything preserved as of right now. Your camera, his camera, my surveillance floor, that young man's phone over there, the recording of the call this man made, the multiple transaction log at all 4 cage windows, every cage tape from midnight, and every email in this building with the name Vane in it going back 16 months. Nobody deletes anything, and Ed, nobody touches that clipboard, not to fix it, not to complete it, not to tidy it up. Photograph it where it hangs. Already sent 2 operators, Sikorsky said. He was wiping his eyes with the back of his wrist and not being subtle about it. "Retta, I'm sorry. I was upstairs. I was right upstairs." "You came down," she said. Then she turned around. Vince Corliss was standing very still with his mouth slightly open. He had aged about 10 years and 2 minutes, and he was already, visibly, assembling a sentence. "Miss Sandiford, I want to be absolutely clear that I had no—" "Not yet," Retta said. She was already walking, and everybody in that corridor, including 2 police officers and the director of surveillance, found themselves walking after her. "There's $27,400 in cash on my floor that nobody wrote down. We are going to deal with that first. Then we're going to deal with you." What happened on that floor over the next 40 minutes was not revenge, and I want to be precise about that, because people always want the next part to be revenge, and it never is. And the reason the real thing is better is that revenge ends, and this did not. Retta walked back to the pit, looked at the second baccarat table, and said 7 words. "Close this game. Nobody touches those chips. The floor supervisor looked at Corliss out of pure habit, and then looked at Retta and closed the game. She had the shift manager wake the compliance officer on call, and she had Sikorsky put 4 operators on tape review, and she had the cage windows sealed with the drawers as they stood, and she asked Sergeant Mullane, politely, whether he would be willing to stand by while a guest was asked some questions, and Mullane said he would be delighted. Then she did the thing that finished Vince Corliss, and she did it without raising her voice once. She walked to the far cage window and lifted the clipboard off its hook and held it up so that the sergeant's body camera could see the whole page. "This is the multiple transaction log," she said. "Some of you have never looked at it. It is 1 page. It is the single most boring object in this building, and it is the only thing standing between 2,400 people and a closed casino because it is the only document in here that adds." She turned it around. 4 entries, whole shift. "Now, here is what actually happened on this floor tonight." She read off the back of a water bottle receipt in a flat voice, the way you read a grocery list. 251, window 3, 9,200, cash, banded. 316, window 1, 8,800, cash, banded. 401, window 4, 9,400, cash, banded. Same guest, 70 minutes. $27,400, 3 different cashiers, none of whom knew about the other 2, because the one piece of paper, whose entire job is to tell them, has a hole in it in the shape of 1 man. She hung the clipboard back on its hook, carefully, without disturbing it. "Every one of those 3 is under $10,000. Not one of them is over. Somebody would like us all to believe that's a coincidence. I spent 11 years writing this property's program, and I have never once seen that coincidence happen 3 times in 70 minutes to anybody who wasn't doing it on purpose." She turned to Corliss. "You knew," she said. It was not loud, and it was not a question. "You didn't do it with a pen. You did it with a sentence. Somebody in this building was told that Mr. Vane finds the cage process intrusive and that his transaction should go to whatever window is open, and that any aggregation questions should come to you personally instead of into the log. I would bet the building that sentence exists in an email, and in about 4 hours a federal agent is going to read it out loud. That is a wild. I don't think you did this because you hate anybody," Retta said, and that stopped him cold, because it was not what he was braced for. "I think you would pass a polygraph on that, and I think you'd be honestly insulted to be asked. You did it because that man's play is 40% of your 4th quarter, and because looking at that clipboard would have obligated you to something, and because the cheapest way in the world to make a question disappear is to make the person asking it disappear instead. It worked on a cage supervisor with 14 years in. It worked twice on a dealer with 11 months. Tonight you tried it on an old woman in a cardigan, and it very nearly worked, and I want you to stand right there and feel how close that came. Miss Sandiford, please, if I could just explain the—" "You're done here," she said. "Effective now. Ed will walk you to your office and then to your car. You don't touch a keyboard, a phone, a drawer, or a file on the way. Everything in that office is preserved as of this minute, including your email, your calendar, your text messages, and whatever you said to Dara Chen in the spring." And then she turned away from him, and that was the last sentence Loretta Sandiford ever said to Vince Corliss, and it was not about Corliss at all. "Mr. Boateng." Kwame came forward from the end of the pit with his phone still in his hand and the face of a young man waiting to be fired. "You filed it," Retta said. "Twice, on the property's own form, signed and dated." "Yes, ma'am. Neither one went anywhere." "They went somewhere," she said. "They went into a drawer belonging to a man who was walking to his car. And in about 6 weeks, when a federal investigator asks this property when it was first informed of a structuring pattern by this guest, the answer is not going to be tonight. The answer is going to be the 11th, in writing, from you." She put out one small hand, and he took it. "You were the first person in this building to do your job. Everything that happens from here starts with your piece of paper. The property filed 41 late currency transaction reports over the following 9 weeks, and a suspicious activity report that ran to 60 pages, and it filed all of them voluntarily before anybody came asking, which cost the cardinal a great deal of money and was the only decision Retta never hesitated over for a second. The regulatory audit was led by a woman named Nadia Fournier, who spent 11 days in a conference room with 2 years of cage tape and a spiral notebook that Dara Chen brought in from her own kitchen drawer without being asked. The audit found the vein pattern going back 16 months, and 2 other guests with smaller versions of the same shape, and a multiple transaction log that had been maintained perfectly for 11 years, and then, beginning in the spring, had developed a hole. Fournier's report contains the sentence that ended a career in one line. The omissions are not distributed randomly and cannot be explained by clerical error. The consent order with the commission cost the property a 7-figure fine and 18 months of enhanced reporting. It did not cost the license. Every person who has looked at that file has said the same thing about why. Because the property found it itself, reported it itself, and turned over the evidence before it was asked, which is a sentence that only exists because a woman in a cardigan spent 70 minutes on a stool at 3 a.m. Curtis Vane was not a whale. He was a bookkeeper for people who needed cash to become chips and chips to become a check, and he had been doing it in that building for 2 years, and he is now the subject of a federal indictment with 11 counts on it, 9 of which are structuring. Dara Chen surrendered her cage supervisor registration and cooperated fully. She sat for 18 hours of interviews over 3 days and produced the notebook, the email, with the word aggregate in the subject line, and the meeting she had never told anybody about. She does not work in gaming anymore. She works in accounts payable at a hospital system, and she called Retta about a year later, and they talked for an hour and a half. Retta will tell you that Dara Chen is the person in this whole story she thinks about most, because Dara did the wrong thing for 16 months and kept a notebook the entire time, which is what it looks like when a person's conscience is still working and their circumstances have simply overpowered it. Vince Corliss was terminated for cause and reported to the commission, and a person who is named in a consent order for suppressing reporting does not get another key employee license in this country. He has not worked in gaming since. There was, for a while, talk of charges. That went nowhere, which disappointed a lot of people and did not particularly disappoint Retta, who said that a man who has to explain 16 months of his life at every job interview for the rest of his working life has already received a fairly complete sentence. Officer Brody Nash was placed on administrative duty pending an internal affairs review. The body camera footage, the property's own surveillance from 4 angles, Kwame's video, and 2 photographs of a 54-year-old woman's wrists all went into the file. Retta wrote to the department, and her letter did not ask for anybody to be fired. It asked one question: what is the written procedure in this agency when a detained person offers identification? And why did that procedure not operate here? That question is now 4 hours of scenario training that Nash himself helped write, which some people find unsatisfying, and which Retta considers the only genuinely useful thing to come out of the entire night. Kwame Boateng moved to the cage in March and into compliance the following year, and the property paid for his certification. And he sat for the anti-money laundering exam at 26, 4 years ahead of the plan he had written on a piece of paper and told nobody about. His 2 suspicious activity notifications, the ones that went into a drawer, are pinned up in the compliance office. Somebody put them there as a joke. Nobody has taken them down. And there was one more thing, and Retta did it herself on a Sunday. 5 weeks before all of this, Corliss had walked an elderly woman off a blackjack game and had her trespassed as a card counter. Her name was Etta Blaylock. She was 71. She came in on the shuttle twice a month, and she had been playing $5 a hand very slowly for 11 years. And the actual offense was that she took a long time and the table was needed. Retta found her in the trespass file, drove out to her building herself with the paperwork rescinded, and sat in her kitchen for 2 hours. Miss Blaylock came back on a Sunday afternoon, and Retta walked her to a $5 game and pulled the stool out for her in front of the entire pit. So, here is the honest part, and it is uncomfortable, and I am not going to dress it up. Loretta Sandiford was saved by 4 coincidences. She happened to own the place. She happened to have her state license in her bag, which she does not always carry. She happened to have a 24-year-old dealer brave enough to press record, and a 63-year-old man happened to walk down 1 flight of stairs for a printout in the 1 minute of the one night it mattered. Take away any one of those 4, and there is no video, no audit, no consent order, no indictment. There is a small woman who was detained in a casino, released with an apology nobody wrote down, and a clipboard that somebody quietly completed before day shift. Most people who get looked at the way Retta got looked at that night do not own the building. They do not have a state license in the bag. Nobody comes running across the carpet shouting their name. They just get walked out, past the video poker bar, while a man playing a dollar machine says something to his wife and laughs. And nothing about it is ever written down anywhere at all. And the 2 failures in that building were the same failure. Nobody looked. Corliss did not look at the log. 3 cashiers did not add 3 numbers. Nash did not look at a license that was hanging 4 feet from his shoulder in a frame. Every one of them read a label instead, because a label is faster, and it is free, and it feels exactly like knowing. That is the joke at the center of this whole thing, and I want you to hold on to it. 200 cameras in that ceiling, and the only thing nobody managed to see was the one that mattered, and the woman standing under all of them was the person who taught the building how to look. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been the one who saw it first and got told to take your break? Have you ever been Kwame, standing there with your phone, doing the math on your schedule and your rent? And be honest with yourself for a second, because I am being honest with myself. Have you ever been the one in the good suit who decided in 8 seconds and never checked? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and this one I really do want to hear. If this story meant something to you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because this is what I do here every week. Ordinary people, written off in a few seconds, and what happens when somebody finally looks. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of each other, and I'll see you in the next one.